Good morning. Thank you for joining us. My name is José Aranda. I'm one of the librarians here at Doña Ana Community College. And this is going to be our last presentation of the fall. We've had a couple of series, actually, I think 3 series. So I'll show you in just a second where you can access them all. Today's presentation is on some resources for history buffs. But before we get started on this page, hopefully you can see clearly some reminders and tips. We don't need to have your video on. If you could please mute your microphone until you have a question, but also we have the chat box available. My colleague Susan Botley will be monitoring that, and I'll stop a couple of times throughout the presentation and at the end to entertain any questions and comments. And this will be recorded as well, so it could be shared or reviewed later when it's available. Couple of contact information here on this page. Up at the right-hand corner is contact information for the DACC libraries, and then of course my email at the bottom there. I want to preface this presentation that this is not an academic history research presentation. History buffs may have multiple meanings. My meaning for this presentation is just history as a hobby. So I will be sharing some of the resources I have collected over the years and or feel that are neat for those that, you know, are interested in reading about history, but in a non-academic sense, almost like a trivial sense. And I think you'll get what I mean when you see some of the titles of the resources that I will be presenting. But I do have a background in history, and if you are interested in academic history research, I can help you individually as a librarian, and or I can refer you either to the NMSU libraries or to the history department over there. So just wanted to set that straight first. And so here is the webpage for all of our presentations that we began a couple of years ago. Last year during the pandemic, we started these and we've just continued. So we have a variety of topics, some academic, some specifically geared towards our students and or programs, but others that are more general topics and open to the community as well. So please visit this website if you want to look at all the ones we've done before. And like I said, they're all recorded. So you could watch them at your leisure and share them wide. We welcome that. So the first one is this one, right? History of the World in 6 Glasses. Now, I'm not promoting drinking, but I liked this book because it explores history through the lens of beverages. And when I mean I don't promote drinking, this book is not only about alcohol, but some of us know that wine and beer are very, very old beverages, right? They go back centuries, if not millennium. But I remember when I came across this book, and I did do the master's program at NMSU, I shared it with one of my professors, and she made a comment like, oh yeah, there are tons of these types of books. So that's what I mean about history buffs, is they're non-academic, and it doesn't mean that it's not seriously written, but it comes from a standpoint of those seeking leisure reading or hobby or just trivial, some of the things that I've already mentioned. And the fact that she mentioned as a history professor and doctorate, right, that there are several of these types of books. You know, I wasn't going to show you all the collections of these types of books. But this was one I acquired and read and enjoyed. I find it very interesting how things that we take for granted nowadays, like food and clothing and housing, how they develop throughout history. So this one obviously takes to the perspective of beverages, and very interesting. I recommend it, by Tom Standage. Aha, this one. That's not in my American history book. Compilation of little known events and forgotten heroes, by Thomas Ayres. I like books like these without getting political. There's just a lot in U.S. history, specifically history in general, to include in let's say a common or typical U.S. history textbook found in public schools. So I own a couple of these types of books. One was very popular. I think it's in the next slide, but you know, my emphasis at NMSU was public history, and so that's kind of a history from the ground up, a public's history, not from the top up, not from those in prestige or power or wealth. So these types of monographs interest me because they provide information on, like the title suggests, little known events, right? Or forgotten heroes and the underside of history. So highly recommend Thomas Ayres. This one's the one I was referring to a minute ago. Very popular when it came out back in 2007. And here's just a blurb. If you're not familiar with this book, or if you haven't heard it, down at the bottom of that title says nearly 2 million copies sold, and I'm sure that was a long time ago. It's, I'm sure, more now, but let me just read you this. If the we in a textbook included American Indians, African Americans, Latinos, women, and all social classes, the book would read differently, just as whites talk differently and more humanly in the presence of people of color. Sure, it is possible to write accurate multicultural history that spreads the discomfort around, rather than distorting history to help only affluent white children feel comfortable about their past. Maybe we can even write and teach an American history that children of the non-elite would want to study. So that is an excerpt from this book. For those that are interested in what's being taught or what's included or not included in curriculum and in public schools and whatnot, I highly recommend this book. And this next one is more academic, but I included it because it's one of my favorite books, and I am very interested in the colonial era, the European colonial era, especially to the Americas. And the Columbia Exchange was one of the first books that I read, because I also have a social science undergraduate degree, that explained, you know, this clashing. You know, it's more commonly known about the the exchanges of goods and animals and foods and culture and customs, but this one takes more what's quite a relevant topic today, right? This biological transference of diseases, as well as other flora and fauna, to the New World. And it really illustrates how deadly it was and how little chance many natives had in trying to defend their land from these invaders / colonists. So I highly recommend this book. It is probably not a history buff, but I felt so passionate about the topic and adamant about this book that I included it. So my apologies. And the last book that I'm going to share with you was a book that I discovered by attending the American Historical Association back right before the pandemic. So it was January 2020 in New York City. And I attended the presentations. I attended the presentation by Dr. Austin and Grundy, and it was just interesting. If you're like me, you like sports, and American culture loves sports, and we love our football and basketball, and you name it, right? So, and this is more for the teaching of history, but through the angle of using sports. And so, you know, for those of us that have had experience teaching public, specifically public, but any actually class of history, we always have the challenge of making it interesting, right? For those that are history buffs or naturally drawn to the study or are majoring in history, not so much, but for everyone else, yeah, there's always that challenge of how do I make this interesting? And I think this book is a great resource for exactly doing that. And I enjoyed their presentation so much that I bought the book. So, and from this presentation, it was where I learned about, and I'm sorry, but this is off the cuff, Unforgivable Blackness, the rise and fall of Jack Jackson, who was the first African-American heavyweight world champion. And so this is a DVD, but it was recommended through these authors one of these authors at the presentation. So one thing can lead to another. And I think that's part of research, but it's also part of exploring your interests. So there you have it, teaching U.S. history through sports. So the rest of the presentation, I'm going to focus on some traditional web sources. We are a library. I am a librarian. So I had to have a slide about our library homepage and the multitude of resources we have. Remember the first slide or the second slide that I showed you about our live guide that listed all the presentations we've done in the past. We have done several presentations on how to access all of these resources you see in front of you: videos, ebooks, databases, books, you name it. So I'm not going to go into that, but I did want to reference this page to help guide perhaps those that have never heard of it or have never attended our presentation before. It is through this web page, and most libraries have a web page like this where you land, and then from there you access whatever desired resource you want and then go from there. So this is our library's homepage. And so real quickly, I'm just going to illustrate. So to access our databases, because most instructors either want a book and or academic sources, scholarly sources. And so databases is the way to go when you need those scholarly sources, or actually any source really nowadays. They're so innovative in their collections and their holdings, right? So when you click on that link that says see all databases, you'll get a list, and this list is list all the databases that our library subscribes to. NMSU has a different list, and we share some common resources, but they have different ones as well as, and they actually have more than ours. And then of course we have some unique ones as well. So you should be, as a student, be able to access both of them, but you have to go through different websites and authenticate and all that. So we can help you with that if you wish. But so from this list, you will select whatever database that you need or was suggested to you to access, and they are in alphabetical order. So obviously, History Reference Center by EBSCO is definitely one of those databases one should consider when researching history. In case you've never heard of it, some of the other generalized databases, EBSCO's Academic Search Complete or Search Premier is a very popular database, and it looks just like this. You may find excellent resources there as well, but and I've given a presentation and spoke on that database before, but I wanted to highlight this one as well, History Reference Center. And so just a couple things to keep in mind when you're in it. The The number one is the smart text searching is a function that allows for exploring and expanding your searches based on the keywords that you use, as opposed to the other options there under search mode. That may or may not be needed. It depends on how you're doing with your results. But what is important, and we tell all the students, is number two, make sure your full text is selected. It just makes all the results it limits all the results in your search have the complete article attached. So it makes it much more convenient for the student and or user. For those that have more time and want to do a more thorough research and can wait for an interlibrary loan, then perhaps you don't want to select the full text. That would bring up more results, but of course, some of them will be only citations, in which then, if that was the case that you wanted it, you would have to go through the process of asking the library to borrow from some other librarian. So that'll take time, but nonetheless, that's basically the difference. And then number three, what I like about it is that it allows you to focus on a timeline in history. All history is in chronological order, right? So when we speak about themes or events, we need to be cognizant of the era. So I love that this database allows for one to select timelines. And the fourth one, adding images down there under image quick view types. You can select this as a filter to limit your search results to make sure they include any of these that you select. So for example, if you're looking for images, right, you can select that either black and white or in color, or graphs, maps, diagrams. Those are all neat supplements in historical research. So I like that capability. So you select these filters as you wish, and then do your search and enjoy your results and go from there. And when you do such a thing, you get something like this, right? Your list of results. So again, I'm not going to go into how to then go through here and access, but I played around with this search results with the key phrase of history buffs. History buff, honestly, is not really an official subject term, but the databases now are so smart that they connect the dots for you. So some of the results will be quite relevant with such a search. So I just wanted to show you what I got from this result, right? For searching history buff. And some interesting results there. I mean, how I became a Canadian history buff, the birthplace of aviation. Book helps history buffs hunt for World War II on the web. That's kind of old, but there you have it. If you do such a search, we can help you if you're not finding what you'd like. But let me remind you again: history buff in and of itself is not an official subject for the most part. Hobby, it would be history and hobby reading or leisure reading, something like that. So if you're having trouble with this and you're trying to search exactly on this topic, we can help you. And so here's an example of when you find a result in searching the database, what to consider. I typed in here history on the internet and history's future in the age of the internet. And so last year, you have all your known categories and the locations of the tools that are necessary for you to take action. This is a book. I think the reason why I chose this as the example was because of the subject. If you look underneath the subject, under subjects, the first one, it says history in the age of abundance, how the web is transforming historical research. And so let me take a minute to share that I think the internet has made searching definitely a lot more convenient, but it has come at a cost. the question of credibility, relevance, currency, authorship. I mean, the list goes on. So for those of us that have a history background, we want to be very cognizant of the resources one consults. But having said that, I am a fan of Wikipedia. And it is a great place to start and get bibliographies to other outside resources. And as an instructor of history, one should be mindful to their students and suggest that these types of resources, these internet resources that make searching, especially on history, quite easy and convenient, should be the first step of a longer process. And I know a lot of instructors still frown upon their students using web resources, but I think there's just a lot of accurate information out there. It's just being mindful of some of those things that I mentioned earlier. You know, is it credible? For example, who's the author and the relevance, and is it current? So it is another challenge as instructors, but maybe you can get some hints or ideas from this book. I believe is an ebook. So there's that. History's future in the age of the internet. History's future. That's what it was. I'm sorry, I may have misspoke there. How the web is transforming historical research. Okay. Another database is an ebook database, and of course it's called History Reference. So this is a database you would use to search for books, electronic books of history. And so interests or hobby, because I wasn't finding anything with the word buff. And this is what I came up with the results. So, you know, there's a lot of military history, and just war enthusiasts that probably go farther than what a buff would entail. So, or hidden history, the untold stories of women, kind of what I was mentioning earlier in this presentation. Let me stop right now. Are there any questions? Anyone have anything to share in the chat? No?
No questions.
Very good. Okay. So, and then, like I've said before, you know, there are additional sources in this database. As you can see there underneath number 2, there are videos. But this search only gave me 10 results. Of course, I used the equivalent subject, but so there you have it. And when I select the record for this book, you have all this information. We call it the bibliographic information. You can choose to do whatever you wish. If you decide to use it, you can access the PDF text file on the left-hand side. If you're not sure, you can save it, email it to yourself, download it, save it on the cloud, whatever, and come back to it later. But it tells you there under the description what the book is about, and it also provides you with subjects and categories to help you focus and or narrow your topic. So those were the mainstay resources that I wanted to talk about. But now comes the internet, and I really did not want to include many internet sources. Although I did say that the internet is a great place to search for basic factual historical information, and or opinion or editorial, but there's just too many out there that I do not frequent. But if it is something that interests you, you know, I'm pretty confident that you already know about them. A simple Google search or a search of any browser will bring millions of them. But this was one of an example that I may support. and I believe this is from England. And what I like about these types of websites is that it gives you, they've already vetted their suggestions, right? So we're kind of going through a third party here to look at, see what they have suggested. Excuse me. Can't talk. I have to call her back. And so this website, I'm not going to go through it, but there you have the URL up on top. They describe these 5 websites: Curiosity Stream, History, Library of Congress, the Bowery Boys, and the Smithsonian Magazine. Some of those very, very reputable sources. The number 1 and number 4, I've never really heard of them, but so this type of results I would entertain. But I figure if you're a history buff, you already know about tons of websites on there. 15, 20 years ago, it was quite common in librarian literature and librarian history specialist literature to have a list of web sources. I don't see them so much anymore. Now, most of them you can find, or most of them perhaps, the credibility lies at the university because that's where the professors are doing their research and publishing. So I would gear someone towards, more accurate, credible resources from this type of resource, one that's affiliated with a university. And this is one example that I found from Fordham University that lists websites for history, and then they break it down there. So I would trust Fordham University more than the previous slide, but that's my preference. So I just wanted to finish the presentation with, yes, there are lots of web resources. You just got to be careful, and but enjoy it, because history is for the reading and history is for the masses. And I'm sure there's plenty of it online for you to enjoy. In summary, I've talked about some awesome books that I have collected throughout my years and I recommend. I then walked over to our traditional library resources like databases and ebooks, and I ended with a couple of websites. That is the conclusion of this presentation. Are there any questions?
None in the chat.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Our next presentations will be next semester. If you have any suggestions, let us know. Again, we try to keep these focused on our students and our programs, but we also do them for the community and for the public. So if there is a topic that you recommend, let us know. There is our email address. Thank you very much for joining us today and for supporting the DACC Libraries. Have a good rest of the day. Oh, is there a, yes, I'm sorry, forgot. That wasn't the last slide. If you have time, please take a minute, actually. There's only 4 questions on this survey. The link is at the bottom. That would help us gather feedback to improve these presentations. And in it, and there too could be a place for you to suggest, to make any suggestions. I'm sorry, I forgot this last slide. And I see some chat happening. Good. My colleague is providing you with that link as well. Again, thank you very much. Adios. Hasta luego.